Hi, everyone. I'm hoping you're having a fantastic week. So, if you look at what we've been doing over the last since we started playing the unicorns, most of the conversations, most of the presentations have been about things to do, and in a way, it kind of makes sense. But this week, where I decided to change things up, and instead, we're going to cover all the mistakes to avoid as an entrepreneur, and we're going to be very privileged to be joined by my brother Olivier, who's also a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. As things seem to be working, I guess we'll get the show for today going. So, welcome to Playing with Unicorns, episode 15 Mistakes to Avoid as an Entrepreneur. Today, we have the great pleasure of being joined by my brother, Olivier, who's a very successful serial entrepreneur in his own right. And we figured we'd have a conversation about all the mistakes we've made as entrepreneurs, because I think, and every successful entrepreneur will tell you, they've probably made every mistake in the book to get to where they are. And so it'll be great to have this conversation. Olivier, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And I have to say, while I was preparing for this presentation, I had to recall all of the mistakes that I have done throughout the last 10 years, and it was a little depressing, I have to say, the amount that I found. But I think it's going to be a great fun and some good stuff. So, just to go a little bit about my background, as you guys might have inferred from the way we look, the way we sound, in our last name, we're very much brothers. And beside being Fabrice's little brother, I'm also a tech entrepreneur. I have built several startups, had a few exits. I'm an angel investor in over 40 different companies that also had some pretty cool exit. But also more recently, I became a mentor at Capital Factory and an advisor at Antler, where I get to help a lot of entrepreneurs build and scale their startup. And last but not least, I've just joined Clearbank as their VP of Founder Success, and uh, it's to launch a new program to help very early stage founders to go and scale their business. And we're very excited because this is going to launch very soon as one of their newer product. And all of this has given me a lot of view and a lot of insight of some of the mistakes that has been done is being done, and kind of like a lot of the pattern. But I think the most interesting part, and as Fabrice will be able to share, is the amount of mistakes that I have done, some of the war stories, some of the mistake that he has done, and I think it's going to be great fun. And kind of to illustrate this, I thought about separating this in the different stages. We can see that at different stages of companies, founders make different kind of mistakes. And as a rule of thumb, what we see is that at the early stage, the mistakes are a little bit more obvious, but also much more deadly. When you do mistakes early stage, they are very unforgiving and end up very often killing the company. However, in the later stage, they're a little bit more obscure, they're harder to find, they don't kill you outright, but they're also harder to fix. And so the way we're going to run a little bit this episode is we're going to talk about some of the mistakes that are affecting the different stages. We're going to see about some peculiar mistakes that we're going to spend a little bit of time on, some a little bit more time on, and then anytime we have a little bit of a story that we can share, we're going to go and share it. So with this little intro, let's get started. And I think the first thing is at the pre-launch phase is that people really love the idea. They all dream to be a Mark Zuckerberg. They all think like this obvious question. But the reality is that it's the idea. is kind of cheap. And if anything, the ideas kind of come together at the same time. You'll see VCs very often being pitched at kind of the same company at the same moment. And what really makes a big difference is actually the execution of it, and how you prepare pre-launch is very important. So to go a little bit about one of the most common mistakes that you see is being in love with your idea, but overlooking the execution of the business. And this happens a lot for very first time founders who are just thinking about it. They're like, oh my God, if I could only do this idea, it's $1 billion idea, but completely disregarding everything. And Fabrice, perhaps you have a few example of this. Sure. Well, that's kind of the gripe of doing a live show. No problem. As Fabrice is having a little bit of a mic issue and is trying to fix it with his sound engineer, his personal sound engineer, I'm gonna just keep on going a little bit. But as Fabrice was saying, because I can hear him, is people who are not quite entrepreneur, who are just at the kind of like wannabe stage, and they kind of overlook on how difficult it is to make a really successful business. Another very common issue that you will see at the pre-launch phase is that going after tiny market and hoping to be VC backed. So a little bit with the dynamic of how VCs are working is that they need to go after a 100x exit, because a lot of their companies are
Aucun
just
presse,
not
ça
going to
utilise pas
make
le
it.
beauty.
So they need to have those outstanding success in order to compensate for everything else that didn't quite work. How's the mic check on your side, Fabrice? All right. So with this going, I want to talk a little bit about an experience that Fabrice and I have done quite a few years ago, where we looked about some of the very fun verticals that were fun, and we looked at some of the passions that we have. And this is like skiing and tennis and like some of the stuff we really love. And we were absolutely distraught to figure out that tennis and skiing is actually very tiny categories overall. Very few
Ok, on va faire un bord
people
derrière.
are doing those sports that we love. And as to create an e-commerce or D2C in that vertical would actually be extremely hard. It's not impossible, because you can absolutely create a company, and there is now a lot more funding options than VCs, like Clearbank actually. But it is going to be very hard to be VC back, because if you're not going after a monster market, they will not see that they can do a 100x exit, and therefore will not back you.
Okay, so
How
I
are you
think
doing on sound,
this is working
Fabrice?
now.
Do you make all of your all of your panelists have to juggle like
Juggle
this?
multiple jobs. Yeah, actually, there's still an issue on this one. It says Scarlet, so maybe this works. Okay, seems to work.
All right, so I just went through one of the example, one of the fun stuff that we've done, where we looked at some of the passion categories that we had, like tennis and skiing, and realized there were tiny
Yeah, that was
tiny
crazy.
categories.
It was like
Um,
I think tennis is a $200 million market, and skiing is a $100 million market, which is like shockingly low.
and actually, fun tip: when we looked at this, we found that hunting and fishing is like a monster market, is like $1 billion market, and so much bigger than what we actually like to
Yeah,
do.
golf
So,
was 4.7
um,
billion, hunting was like 11 billion, and fishing 12 billion. Something absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so perhaps we're not mainstream in our interest. Another one that I think is quite fun is or happens quite often, and in this case it's like a little bit of unlucky, is misunderstanding timing. When you see some of the ideas that are being developed right now, and they're actually billion-dollar ideas, you see they actually already existed, and sometime in a pre-bubble era. And I think the obvious example is pets.com, and the that is now Chewy, and Chewy is like an obvious e-commerce that is working so well. It's like a unicorn, but pets.com actually was known as the biggest mistake ever, as an e-commerce at the bubble era, and it's really just a question of timing. And quite frankly, the Groupon of the world that already existed before Groupon. It's just a question of timing. Fabrice, why don't you talk a little bit about your marketing expenditure at Auckland? Your marketing expenditure at
Wait a second. I said we still have
Auckland.
technical issues. Keep talking.
All right, so I will tell the story for Fabrice. I hope I will get it right. But when Auckland was operating, which was the first company of Fabrice, which was a marketplace similar to eBay, they had gone and done TV advertisement. They actually won an award for their advertisement. It was so good. The only thing is that their budget was something like $8 or $10 for every person who was connected to the internet at that time in the market. So their budget was completely, disaligned with reality. It would never actually work. And so for them, um, it turned out okay, as they ended up being able to sell. But this kind of behavior, with the timing and the number of people online that are looking for your services, are uh, are just not ready for your product, is a sure kill. But one of the harder one to avoid, because timing is very difficult to notice. And here is one where it's more specific for first time founder, is and again, it would be a great example for Fabrice, but the going after a winner takes all category. So FJ Labs is very often focused on marketplaces, and when they're focused on marketplaces, there are different types, but one of the biggest type is a winner takes all category. And do you have do you have sound, or
No,
do
I
you
have
not have
sound on
sound
this
now?
one without the chat. I don't have it at the same, but it's fine. Yeah, no, sorry about the technical issues. I think we
No
screwed up the
worries.
setup this week a little bit, but yeah, no, totally right. The marketplaces are amazing because they're scalable and they have network effects. The problem is, that's what you were saying, is like, if you're a first time founder, your ability to raise huge amounts of money is partly limited. And so if someone else on the other side raises like 50 million, 100 million, you're not going to be able to compete. And if you're number two, the value you create is very little, if not zero. And so, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your example of OLX in a country that you won, like I think like Afghanistan or India, versus OLX US?
Yeah, the now, first, a few things were interesting. So, first of all, in many countries where OLX, which is the largest classified site of the world today, it's like 5,000 employees, and in 30 countries, it's 350 million uniques. When we launched, there were a lot of winners or leaders, supposed winners in many countries, but actually they weren't all that big, and none of them had raised a lot of money. So we were able to go in with, frankly, a couple $100,000 in like India, Pakistan, Portugal, and take over the market and become ginormous. And today we're leaders in a country like Russia. I think in Russia it's like 300 million revenues, 200 million in profits. And now in the US, the same amount of money, a couple $100,000, didn't go very far. And we had Craigslist as the incumbents, and sadly we're not able to displace them, because even though we had an amazing product, the network effects were so strong that we couldn't really break in any way, shape, or form. And so ultimately, frankly, the company was where in the US were zero. And that's been true around the world. Whenever, even when we were number two, but not the value of that asset was de minimis, like some 500K, a million, whatever. Whereas when we're number one, it's worth like $1 billion. I'm sure the just OLX Russia, it's a company called Avito, is worth multiple billion. OLX Brazil, which is called OLX, is worth multiple billion. And so winning in these marketplaces makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and if you're a first-time founder, you might have a much tougher time to raise. If you're, an ER at, General Catalyst and they back you to start, it might be fine. But if you're going through the traditional route of raising a little bit by stages, it might be just very, very difficult to face somebody who has more capital than you. And so I would personally steer away from being as a first-time founder of category where you need infinite amount of capital because it'll be very hard to get that backing.
Totally,
One of the
totally agree.
mistake, one of the mistakes that I have done directly, jump both feet into this one, is repeat founders tend to jump headfirst into a new project. In 2013, I had closed my third company, Shoes for You, and I had exited my first two. So I had money and time for the first time in my life, and I thought I would take a vacation. It was going to be my first real vacation. I was very excited. I went to play tennis for an entire month, and that was great. But then I started going crazy. Like I had so much time on my hand, and I was participating in like investment calls and like debriefs with FJ Labs. And as soon as I heard an idea while we were kind of like iterating of like what could be a company that we could do, I just jumped on it, and I just really went headfirst into this. And unfortunately, and perhaps predictably, this was not going to be the best company for me to build, and yet I was so enthralled about just doing something and just being back into building something that I jumped with it, kind of ignoring some of the red flags that were in hindsight 2020 obvious. And this actually, I read a couple articles for repeat founders. This actually seems to be quite common.
Yeah, well,
Um,
actually, in fact, I think I did this. It turned out not to be a mistake, but I think you're antsy, especially if you have a failure. So my first company, where Auckland, where I went from hero to zero, and like after I sold, I felt like I'd missed the biggest opportunity of my life. I really wanted to do something and I prove myself, etc. And in a very different environment. So I did take a little bit of time to think through what I wanted to do, but actually I didn't go on vacation. I went straight from finishing selling the company to like being a consultant for a million startups to launching the new startup because I needed to like get out there. And now it turns out I got in a way lucky. The company that I ended up building ended up being very successful, but that was luck. It wasn't necessarily the best idea. It wasn't necessarily the most thought through. And in fact, over the years, we've improved the way we evaluate companies and pick the ones to pick so much more. I mean, episode 9, which is how to come up with the idea, and episode 10, which is how to evaluate ideas, that level of thoroughness, we frankly, even 5 years ago, we didn't do. So we're now, it takes time to be deliberate and thoughtful and careful and not just feel the need to do something, especially if you failed. And well, in both cases, if you've been successful, you're like, oh, I can never fail. Whatever I do is going to turn into gold. And so you feel like you can do anything you should do immediately, which probably is not a good idea. And if you failed, you're like, I need to prove myself. And so both actually are great times to take a break, take a breather, reflect, be deliberate.
yeah, and I mean, kind of, you have time. You really do to pick the best thing possible. I think another thing is, and this is a mistake that not only have I done, but I have seen so many people do, is launching where it's convenient instead of where it's mission critical. And this is changing a little bit with COVID. However, in the uh, where you're launching, particularly in a country wise, makes a lot of difference. So I had one of my friend who decided to do a D2C furniture business in Argentina because he lived in Argentina, and this is kind of where his friends were. But the reality is that he had just moved there a year ago, and we everybody told him launch in Brazil. It's a much bigger country and a much bigger GDP per capita. It's going to be a lot easier, and he didn't necessarily listen. And after a year, he finally got enough traction to go and launch Brazil. And it turns out that Brazil month 2 was bigger than his entire year of Argentina, because it makes such a big difference what is the target that you're going. And even though today there is a lot, more remote work with COVID, I'd argue this still holds true whenever you need to have boots on the ground and whenever you need to have people in a particular place. You need to be in a place where you can find talent and where you have a market for your product.
I'd actually add that, I mean, so first of all, in Latin America, especially at that time, launching in Brazil is the place to launch as opposed to launching anywhere else. But I think the mistake applies everywhere else. I mean, my first company, Auckland, I built the first offices in Nice because we had free rent and it was easy, but very rapidly realized that the VCs were in Paris. We had to be in Paris and had to move everything to Paris. And fortunately, I did. Had I not done that, I don't think we've gotten anywhere. And we see it. I think we live in a world where now the teams are becoming distributed, so it's completely okay to have your sales team in Utah, to have your tech team in Uruguay, etc. The problem, though, is capital. I suspect will not continue. Will not be that distributed. The VCs, even though today they're willing to do investments through Zoom, they do like to be on the board of the companies and visit them in person, which means if you look at where the board members are or live relative to where the startups are, I think on average it's 30 minutes from the office. And so if you're not in the core geographies where the VCs are, which in France would be Paris, the UK London, and in Germany Berlin, and the US it would be probably San Francisco, New York, to a lesser extent LA, and maybe now Austin. If you're out of these geographies, you just play the game on a much harder mode because the threshold for them to invest in you is much higher. And I think it probably is one of the mistakes of one of your companies at a Home 61. It's like I think if you'd been in another city, you probably would have done a lot better.
Yeah, I think as a second town, as a multiple time founder and a multiple time founder, we were doing like 40K in revenue after like 3 or 4 months. And this would have warranted a pretty easy fundraising in normal circumstances if I had been in New York or San Francisco. And we were hitting all of the right metrics. The story made a lot of sense. But instead, it was extremely hard. And the number one question I had is like, why are you in Miami? And it kind of made sense for data integration purposes, and it made sense for a lot of reasons. But the overall arcing situation was that being far from the VCs were very hard. And that's not even to count like the talent that we needed to bring in and on and so forth. That was also made harder by being in a city where that was not traditionally a tech city. So yeah, very much a mistake that I have done. And to actually, as a good segue to this, here is another mistake that I have done: picking a business with a poor founder fit. And in this case, I want to talk a little bit about Shoes for You. Shoes for You was a D2C brand, fashion brand, where we basically was similar to Just Fab or to Shoe Dazzle. And what happened is that we would sell a new collection every single month, and with a subscription business. And coming off of Brand's Club, coming off of Brand's Club, where we had operated an e-commerce, I was like, I can totally do this. Like, I know logistics, I know marketing, I know tech. We're going to be selling like crazy. Everything's going to be great, except that it's a D2C and not a retail e-commerce. And so I really knew operations, but I had no idea how to build a fashion brand. And I mean, look at us. We're not the most fashionable people to start with. We literally take advice from our cousin to tell us what to buy so that we wear shirts. And in this case, we wear the same shirt, actually. So we're not the most fashion forward people, and building a brand didn't work. And what's even crazier is that I knew how to build a brand in terms of a company. So we were actually in all of the business magazines and we were often like put side by side with like the Zappos of Brazil in terms of exposure for the company. So all of the VCs knew us, and not a single one of our customer knew us. So it was crazy. So we operated the most efficient D2C e-commerce that nobody wanted. We could deliver. I think at the time we had the fastest delivery in Sao Paulo. We were doing same day delivery, which completely unheard of in Brazil. and we're doing this in Sao Paulo, and it would take a little longer in the other places, except that nobody bought the shoes.
No,
Uh,
frankly, it's a mistake at FJ Labs when we build companies we've made before because we're so thoughtful about like, is this a good idea? That then we kind of, it's kind of the first mistake you refer to. It's like we fall in love with the idea. It's like, yeah, of course, it's an amazing idea. Of course, yeah, I can do this. I can dedicate the next 5 years of my life to it. And one of the first companies we built, Lofty, which was a marketplace for art, and Mark Lurie, who's an amazing entrepreneur. I mean, like great background, HBS, worked at Bessemer, was in EIR with us, etc. I was like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go do this, and I kind of like things that are collectible or old, etc. And it turns out that if you're building a business, having a true passion for it makes a huge difference. Not just because it's a good idea, you should go and do it. You should do it because this is your life, like your life's mission. This is the problem you need to fix, and you know how to fix it. I mean, both very important.
Absolutely, and I think this is I think founder market fit is just as important as market fit. And one of the interesting thing is that I've seen people who love their idea, but once it's time to launch, they don't necessarily realize because even though they didn't take capital yet, they're actually in a race. As soon as you decide I'm going to build this company, the race is on. And with this is I think it's particularly true for self-funded projects that I've seen. They tend to procrastinate. They have unlimited amount of funds, so they're on a cash flow that they can keep on funding the company, and they feel that ultimately they can do it on the weekend and they can do it whenever it's fine, and they tend to focus on things that they only kind of like instead of what they need to do. But this will actually create a massive problem that I'm going to touch on in just two little bullet points. The first one is when you lack proper deadlines and deliverables, you tend to actually not do any of them. You just tend to have it passively bumble around, etc., and have, as it turns out, zero growth because you're not really doing what is the most important. The next one is, and this is something where I'm going to stop for just a little bit to talk about it, is doing what you like as opposed to what is needed. And this is true actually for founders in general. I will touch a little bit about one of the mistakes I've done. For example, for Home 61, very clearly the fact that we couldn't control our growth was steered by the fact that we didn't really know how to do sales management and sales scaling, and that was the biggest problem for the company for sure. Like our sales team, we just didn't know how to handle the sales team from its recruiting to its retention to its training on and so forth. But what I really like to do in a company is the technology part. I love the product, I love the marketing, and it was jarring looking back as how much time I spent on product when really I should have spent more time in sales. And the reason for it is very simple. I didn't really like sales, but I loved product and I loved playing with it and I loved tinkering with it. Um, and I think this happens a lot. And this also is really interconnected with the founder market fit, because what it would be awesome is if what was really needed happens to also be what you really like. In my case, it wasn't the case. And that created a massive problem. I mean, I kept on playing with so many features that ultimately didn't really matter. And Fabrice, perhaps you want to talk a little bit about how you structured yourself to always having to do what you like as opposed to and how you build your teams and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points here. The first one, yes, is absolutely you should build the team such that you do the things you love doing. Very early in my life, I realized that if I had to read a legal document, I would fall asleep after the third word, and so it was very obvious. I always needed a co-founder or a CFO or someone that was actually going to do that part for me. So first of all, in my first company, I didn't have that, and because I didn't read the documents, because I assumed everything was legit. My lawyer knew what they were doing. I ended up getting screwed and lost what would have been hundreds of millions of dollars at a very young age. So in the future, I always had a partner. So at Zingy, I had my CFO, who's still my CFO 20 years later in a way. At at FJ Labs, I have my co-founder Jose Marin, who does all the back office. I mean, he's also great and can help on getting deals, etc. But like the way we really split the work is he does all the negotiating the shareholder agreement, working the LPs, working the lawyers, and a lot of the stuff that I really hate doing. The other thing I'd like to point out on what you said in terms of self-funded projects is if you're a second-time founder and you have some money, you're like, hey, maybe I'll just fund it myself. The problem of doing that is you remove that kind of like pressure and expectation. So there's a clear, and I think Olivier is going to touch on that a bit later, but between stages, VCs expect about 18 months. So from like seed to pre-seed to seed to A to B to C. And if you remove, and there's a clear growth expectation between these different stages. And if you go slower than that, it's a very, very negative signal. And so it's a problem if you're doing this part-time as a first-time founder. It's a problem if you're a second-time founder, you've been successful the first time, you just keep putting money into this because it's not a big deal for you. It removes really do we need finding product market fit and making sure that you're scaling properly. Because if you're not scaling properly, you're not having the right unit economics, it probably means you should pull the plug. But if you just take your time, you're gonna like waste years of your life and probably a lot of your personal money doing the wrong thing.
Yep, absolutely. And absolutely, and we're going to touch upon that a little bit more in just a little bit. But I want to go and hammer into building features and services because you can, rather than because you need to. And I think there's a famous saying that you should be ashamed of your first product, and I think that's completely true. Frankly, whatever is the problem that you're trying to fix, it should have a very simple solution. And if you need 150 features for you to actually have their product to ship, this is not gonna work. A new feature tend to improve things by like 2, 3, 4, maybe 5%, but they don't really change the game. And so um, again, it goes back to everybody loves to play with product. Everybody loves to mess around with the tech team. I'm one of the first person. Fabrice used to play around with like pixel by pixel with his designers. They were going crazy. I think they lost all of their hair doing this. But ultimately, what is your core product? What is a simple, elegant solution that you're doing? And I want to talk a little bit about a particular feature that we have built for our for Home 61, where we were handling real estate transaction from the very first click for the discovery to the sales process to the closing, and then even after we would help you even after you moved out. We would send you updates, etc. And we built this beautiful vault where you could see all of the different steps you needed to do to close your transaction, what was missing. You could go back afterwards to find all of your documents there, and people can even see what if the value of their home would have changed over time and etc. But that feature, which by the way was very complicated because we needed to find like all of the different exceptions, all of the different contracts, how do we make it a beautiful flow? Like we must have spent 100 to 200 hours building all of this. Nobody cared. Like nobody cared because what they would do is that they would text their real estate agent and ask, "Can you send me the contract or what is the new value of my home?" We lost against SMS, which makes so much sense. It's so much easier to do this rather than try to log in into a website you've interacted a couple of hours in your life and remember 3 months after. And again, we didn't really need this feature, but like, hey, we had a tech team. I was thinking about it would be really cool to have that. We didn't need it, but we could do it, so we did it, and that's purely a mistake.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. I mean, and you pointed out earlier, I used to spend so much time making sure that everything was pixel perfect, perfect alignment, because it appeals to my sense of aesthetic of like clean, minimalist, etc. But it doesn't move the needle. Most people don't even notice it that when there's like pixels misaligned, and like it grates at me. But I think most people don't even notice it, and it definitely doesn't change conversion rate, etc. And that's why actually I think might be the first episode I did in Playing Unicorns. How do you build an MVP for 20K? Because you don't need to spend more money. Like whatever is the core functionality for product market fit, you put it out there, see if it works. And if you're like 50% away from where you need to be on unit economics or whatever, you're gonna get there. If you're an order of magnitude away, there's no playing with product that you can do that is going to get you there because it's like 2%, 2%, 2%. Yeah, sum total, you can 2x maybe, but you're not going to get 50x away, 10x away from where you need to be. So could not agree more.
And by the way, this is true, and it makes me sad. I love to play with product. My previous CTO, I still call him my CTO because I just love him. Like Serial, like indulged me a lot, I have to say, and it was great. But moving along, and like kind of like the sum product of all of this is that you're in a race, and VCs are very misunderstood. I think very often people see them as this infinite amount of flow of money who will basically choose which ideas on the merit of the idea. But that's not true at all. The reality is that VCs have limited amount of capital, limited amount of attention, and when they receive a deck, they're going to look at what is the best company that I have right here in front of me. And what's going to happen is they're going to look at one company who has been bumbling around for like a year, playing around, not being super tight on growth, not being super tight on finding the market product fit, and another company who has been crushing it for the last like since their launch, and they've been 3 months and they've been crushing it. Which one do we invest? When we look at it this way, the answer is obvious. But when you look at it from the point of view of the first person, they're like, oh, but my idea is fantastic. Why didn't they invest? They don't see my genius. Well, no, it's you are actually competing against people who are not going to be in your category. You're competing against the other decks that VC has received that week. And actually, that week, a week behind, a week in front. But this is you're competing for the attention, and you need to be the pearl within that cohort.
From a
And
funding perspective,
and
that's totally true. Right, like every week, at FJ Labs, we talk to 50 companies, and then the team discusses those 50 companies. It's very rare that it's like 3 companies doing the same thing that week. Maybe over time that might be true, but that week we're comparing it to Olivier's point, the best companies we talked to that week, and we invest in 1 or 2 from that week. And so if you happen to not be the standout on multiple criteria like quality of the team, the traction, the unit economics, etc., you're not going to get picked. And so, yeah, your competition is other ideas out there in general, other teams, other execution, not the people for money, at least, not the people doing the same thing as you.
absolutely, and this is where the key operating word is growth. Like, and growth can come in different ways. It could be like if you're social media, it could be your number of your amount of traffic or users. If you're a marketplace that's not already monetizing, it could be GMV. But in general, if you have real revenue with real unit economics and you have growth in this is what kind of trumps everything else. But um, but growth is going to be whatever growth you can show. This is how people are going to compare you, and they're going to compare you as a factor of growth over time. Therefore, the shorter amount of time with the maximum amount of growth is going to be so important. If you procrastinate, you're playing on very hard mode. With this, another mistake that I have done is pitching your best VC contact first. Going back to my idea, and it kind of like touched upon little bit on the fundraising. I was like fundraising from Miami, and having already hit kind of like all of the metrics that I knew VCs really wanted, I did I did the following. Again, hindsight 2020. I booked all the VCs I knew in New York in the same week, and they were back to back to back to back. I still remember I went to pitch at or bitch me sometime, but I went to pitch at Bessemer, and it was so tight that with traffic I was not going to make it. So I had to run like maybe 10 blocks outside the taxi because of the traffic. I had to run to the Bessemer office while holding my arms like this so I wouldn't have massive sweat marks under my arm. So I was running literally in the streets of New York with my arms like this over to the Bessemer office. Great meeting. They didn't invest, and they didn't invest for the following reason: is that because I had put not only everybody in such a short amount of time, but also I had put all of like the VCs that I said were most likely to invest. There was 2 or 3 problem in my pitch. I had practiced it with Fabrice. Actually, I had practiced it with my co-founders, and But there was a few problems that the VCs very early on found in my pitch and kept on hammering at this. It was like kind of a big spot on the pitch, and I didn't have a great answer. I didn't have time to think about a great answer because I kept on running one to the other. So I literally did 1 week of being asked the same question and me trying to find a solution while rushing to the other meeting while I'm like running with my arms extended through traffic of New York trying to find a good answer for this. And that was a massive mistake. The reality is that you should lay out your fundraising is not fun. I don't think anybody loves it. But you should lay out to first the people you think is less likely, give you a good week to do this, then started with people that you think are a little bit more likely and improve and give yourself a little bit of time. Fundraising is not fun. It needs to be run as a tight ship. But if you pitch to the first and best contacts first and in its tight ship, you will not have time to adjust and to improve your pitch. And by the way, all of them ask more or less the same question. So I could have started with the least likely VC first, and he would have asked me the same question of the most likely.
Well, the opposite mistake that a lot of people make, I think, is not having a specific process. Meaning they VCs reach out to them, and then they were like, okay, let's talk to them. And that could be whenever those VCs reach out to them, as opposed to saying, no, we're busy, heads down executing right now. We're going to go out of market in Q2. And then in Q2, preparing a target list, reaching out to them, and then scheduling the interview such that everyone is at the same place in the process. Because from the VC, you have a first meeting, then a second meeting, then conversations, then a partner meeting. And the problem is if you're talking to these on an ad hoc basis, you're going to get a term sheet from one VC, and you're just at the beginning of conversations with others. You're not going to be in a position to choose, and you're probably going to take the first term sheet you get. Whereas if everyone's on the same timeline, at least you get 5 term sheets at the same time. You can pick the best fit for you.
Absolutely, that actually is true for many things. And yeah, it didn't occur to me, but yeah, not yeah, you need to have a process when you're things. That's a mistake I haven't done yet. But you know, we I can always come back to it at some point.
I've made that
And this
mistake.
actually Um, and actually, that's a good point. Throughout my career, I thought that after I've learned from my first company, I would not do like I thought I was kind of like done, right? I knew how to operate, but I kept on doing new mistakes at every single company, which is a little bit annoying, I have to say. But you know, it is. I think it's part of life. I think on top of that, the market changes, dynamics changes, so you will keep on making
Yeah,
mistakes.
no,
I
I
think
think
that's the
people
only
don't
certainty.
learn. It's hard. Well, it's hard to learn from other people's mistakes. I mean, obviously, the objective of this show today is learn from our mistakes, so you don't make you don't make your own mistakes. And in fact, I think we would both argue we've made every mistake there is to make. And I've actually said this very often. It's like I've failed my way to success. But I think most people have a hard time actually learning from other people's mistakes. I think that's also true of us, right? Like a lot of those mistakes other people have done before. Some people might even told us about them, but like, no, we're different, we're better. Like it happened to us. Obviously,
I,
we are
I,
special.
I mean, to that point, I had told my friend not to launch in a difficult city, and I immediately like my next company, I did exactly just that. So I'm totally with you. But please do listen to this episode, and do there are some good things here, I promise. um, all right, and I think the last one, particularly when you're at seed, is not taking the money when it's available. And this is like, let's say you are something happens when you're fundraising where at the beginning it's really difficult and suddenly you start getting a momentum. So in my rule of thumb is that when you're raising $1 million, when you get to 400K, suddenly like the first 100K was super hard, the getting to 400K was hard, getting to 600 was easy, getting to a million was like people were fighting to get into the deal because there is a little bit of FOMO that's happening with investors. Like when they feel that there is a good deal, everybody wants to jump in. And very often you can get oversubscribed. And I, like every founder, am very worried about dilution. But you know what? I'm even more worried now is that when I'm going to have to do my Series A and I'm going to be missing like 100 or 200K to get to like the next round of funding, I go back to that seat. I'm like, oh my god, I said no to 200K because I didn't want to have like a little bit more of dilution, and then now I might lose the company because we're running out of money by 100K. And by the way, the true example, this is exactly not only what happened for Home 61, where I think we fundraised the Series A maybe 2 weeks before we ran out of cash, and I kept on thinking about like some of the and some of the money we didn't take because of the fear of dilution. Now, to be fair, we had already extended. Like I think we were raising 1 million. We extended it to 1.3 million, but we could have done 1.5. Hell, we could have done maybe 2 million. And yeah, I would have been very sad for the dilution. But like if we do a home run, who cares? So take the money when it's available because it might not be tomorrow.
Now, that's totally true. Like, raise a bit more than you think you need. Like, people, founders, and I think you and I have obviously been made that mistake many times. We're so delusion sensitive, but if life doesn't always work out exactly as planned, there could be problems, there could be pandemics in the world that happen that you didn't plan for. Having extra cash in those periods of time will be wonderful. And if you didn't need it, too bad. You got 2, 3, 4% more dilution than you would have experienced otherwise. It's totally worth the insurance. If the money's there, take it. Now, if you're raising 3, I'm not saying raise 6. I'm saying raise 4 if it's available, because you're not going to regret that. And by the way, one of the questions we ask at FJ Labs is, how much cash do you have in the bank? What's your runway? And if you have like 2 months or 6 weeks worth of cash in the bank, it's a very negative signal where like it's a signal also of like your inability to plan, to raise the right time, to make the right decision, to be safe for the company. And so if you can still get all the funding we're going to invest, but the probability that you're going to get all the funding if you have that little runway is also a lot lower. It's a lot riskier.
Yeah, totally. I mean, do you want to invest in the company who has 2 weeks left of cash? Thankfully, the answer was yes in my case, but I don't know if this would have panned out so well. Like odds are, most of the time when this happened, you're gonna die. So might as well not run that risk. Um, and going a little bit, so now you've launched your company, things are going, you might have a little bit of money, and you want to take on a co-founder. And co-founder, and I'm like the entire section here is just going to be about co-founder, is because the number one thing that kills company, in my experience, is actually co-founders fighting. And unfortunately, also some of the mistake that I have done. And and this is something where if you guys pay attention through this presentation, I would particularly suggest paying close attention to this part, because in my experience, it has been more traumatic having to separate myself with some co-founders than having to close my company. And that was like major, like perhaps one of the hardest thing I had to do. I have a very privileged life. Clearly, this is not the end of the world, but it was definitely one of the biggest challenge that I've encountered. And Fabrice, maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges, like the co-founder dynamic. We're going to go through the common mistake, but have you seen this as well? Co-founders fighting, good companies going to die because of it?
Yeah, I'd say most companies that die is for 2 reasons. Reason number one is they don't find product market fit. And the second reason is the co-founders fight. And they can fight about a lot of things. They could fight about like what the correct strategy is, but it could fight about the roles they should be playing respectively, who they should be raising money from. I mean, and that's why a lot of people are sometimes worried when it's a husband and wife, for instance, co-founders, because they can work really, really well when it works well. It could also work really, really badly when it works badly. Now, we've actually been very lucky and privileged to invest in actually people that are in couples that have worked really well. But no, I'd say the number one cause of failure in companies, yeah, or number two is probably co-founders fighting, and it's common. Now, I've been really lucky in my life that hasn't been the case. I've had co-founders that looked a lot like me. I mean, if you look at Alec, my co-founder at OLX, like I did Princeton, he did Harvard, I did McKinsey, did BCG. We kind of had like, I was CEO of Auckland and eBay of Europe. He was the CEO of Denomate and eBay of Latin America. We had like complete overlapping skill set, and we actually never discussed who would do what. and yet kind of naturally fell into this groove of like he does the operations and things in Latin America, and I do like fundraising and product and technology and strategy, and it worked. But I think I got lucky. I don't think this is not the way I would recommend most people to do it. And frankly, the same thing happened at FJ Labs. My co-founder Jose, similar background. Like he did Stanford and was consultant and built a startup studio. We also never discussed who does what, but like very naturally realized that he loves. There's a set of things that he loves and is really good at that I really hate, and so we split it. But we also never really had that conversation. And I think in hindsight, I got lucky. I wouldn't recommend that for most people. I think most people need to have the hard conversation, who does what, and also think through with the skill sets to make sure that you're really a good team, that you're really complementary. And what we do very often at FJ Labs is founder dating. Like when an EIR goes and looks for co-founder, well, we think through who that co-founder should be, and typically these days it's been CEO, COO, CTO, the three co-founders. But like you go and have, not only do you work on projects before you launch the company together, like you work together, you go, but you go and have social dinners with each other, you go hang out with their family and their friends, and like you really make sure you can work through issues. Because if you don't have these hard conversations and tests ahead of time, when things go badly, and by the way, they always go badly at some point in the life of a startup, you're gonna you run out of money, etc. You're not gonna have a solid foundation of relationship that you can work through the issues.
Yeah, I think it's a great segue about going into some of the nitty gritty stuff and some of the common mistakes when you're picking a co-founder. So one of them, exactly, jumping into bed too soon. And I have done this. I get very excited. I get very excited about the idea. I get very excited about the person. I tend to see all of the positive and kind of like ignore the red flags. It's not that I don't see the red flags. I just choose to ignore them and thinking like, hey, this is not going to be a problem because all of the positive is going to is going to overcome it. And I think this is true for co-founders. This is also true for HR and whenever I hire team members. Every single time I saw some red flags and I chose to ignore it because I wanted to focus on the positive. The reason it didn't work was because of the same red flag that was seen almost at the beginning. So perhaps it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and then I am just making it happen, but it doesn't really matter. At the end, the result is still the same. It's like ultimately it didn't work out because of those very same red flags. And so jumping into bed too soon is really getting too excited and not knowing how the people's philosophy, how they work, how you guys are going to work together, and so forth. Just being the simple excitement for the initial excitement for the idea and jumping into bed together is not good reason enough for it. Just because eventually the excitement is going to die out a little bit. The passion might stay, like the love for the company might stay, but the excitement will die out, and suddenly you're going to be faced with reality. And it's very similar to dating. Like you think your partner is super funny when you're just dating them, but then after a little time, you kind of realize, well, maybe I was a little bit enthralled, and they're not as funny, but they're really cool. This is the kind of thing that's happening here too. And talking a little bit about what Fabrice said is having completely overlapping skills, and this is okay or not okay. And so that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. One of the things that was a problem in one of my companies is that we had completely um, overlapping skills. So he could absolutely do my job and I could absolutely do his job, but the company was not big enough to actually warrant two super senior people doing it. If anything, we should have one of us should not have been. We should one of us was too much. We should have like had more manager people or more junior people to actually do something different. Would have been a better use of our resources. But we really loved each other. We really wanted to make it work, but we had like such overlapping skills. And on top of that, what we liked to do and what we didn't like to do were kind of similar. And so that then you had like so many cooks in the kitchen that was so difficult. And now to throw a curveball at this, having no overlapping skills. So that becomes a problem, particularly when you see people with consulting background who suddenly work with CTOs and they cannot talk to each other because they don't understand each other's world and they don't see how are things being developed, how long it takes. The CTO might not understand why are priority changing, why are they not giving the time to follow through, and that creates a lot of problem. And so you want to have enough of a basis to communicate and enough to build trust, but it shouldn't be just the same.
No, in fact, actually, I had that problem with in a way my first company because I came from a consulting background. I'd just come out of McKinsey. My CTO was absolutely fantastic, but what he wanted to do was like work on improving the search algorithm or whatever. Like he didn't have a business background, so he didn't really understand like what really would be the business priorities that would be running the business. It's like this isn't like, and sometimes like doing funnel optimization is not fun. And so the best engineers are not like, this is what I want to be doing. But it was like a fight, or not a fight, but like a really hard conversation to like make sure that the things that really move the business or move the needle were getting done. And so it's good to make sure that even your CTO or VP engineering actually has or is aligned in terms of the vision, the product actually understands or has a modicum of like business sense that you can actually have a conversation around it. Otherwise, it makes everything really difficult.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's true. Very true for Auckland. Now that I think of it, it was definitely a little bit of that dynamic where I remember you improved by like 0.5% the search algorithm, but nobody was searching on it, so it didn't matter. Being able to be radically honest and no one has start. So okay, this one actually, I apologize. I put it as what you should do as opposed to the mistake. Okay, the mistake here is not being able to speak your mind and keeping things inside that are bothering you and just letting them bubble up. So the good news is that if your company is just a trailblazing and it's just a rocket ship, a lot of things are being swept under the rug. People don't care because they're just excited to be in the rocket ship. But most companies are not a rocket ship. You actually have to work your way to get there. And so you need to be able to communicate very honestly about the things that are bothering you, and you need to be able to tell it in a safe space where you can say it and the other person is not gonna create a bigger problem. You need to actually be able to communicate to resolve problems instead of communicating and create bigger problem. And one of the really cool thing is that I had this problem when I moved to the US because I spoke fairly well English and I could understand the different nuances of the language. But when I was in Brazil, my vocabulary was very limited. I had to speak to Portuguese. My entire team was in Portuguese, and so I didn't give a fuck. I just spoke and said exactly what I needed to say, and it made things so much easier. And on top of that, people kind of like forgave me for being very blunt because they're like, well, he doesn't know any other words, so he has to say whatever he needs to say. And so it was so liberating and it worked so well. And it was in part because of not being able to to speak the language as well as I could or should have. And it made things a lot better, a lot easier. Radical honesty is a big theme right now, I think, in the tech scene, but I think it's something that Fabrice has applied his entire life just by being who he is. And I have to say, it's very refreshing.
Yeah, no, I'm radically honest and transparent in both my personal life and my business life, with one caveat on the business side. In your startup, you know, I I don't, especially at Zingy, like we were always being sued for billions of dollars. I was always running out of money. I never told people like, oh no, we have like 2 weeks of cash, and we were always at like 1 week or 2 weeks of cash because I was raising money in 5K increments. And so I didn't quite paint a completely transparent and beautiful picture of how or picture of how things really were relative to where I would like things to be. And in fact, most founders sell the dream and not necessarily the reality, right? Like the sharing the way this you don't share the way the sausage is made with the VCs in a way, and you don't share with the employees when you're low on cash. You're worried that you're not going to be able to get the funding round on time, et cetera. So I think you still, because telling them actually doesn't serve a purpose. It adds stress to them. It doesn't allow them to do their job better. And so I wouldn't be radically transparent about everything, but radically transparent about what you need them to do and how you guys should be working together. And if they're not doing their job well, being able to tell them that what they need to improve. I think that absolutely. But I'm not sure I would go to the extreme of like, this is our cash position, this and we're out of cash in two
Um,
weeks.
Fair enough, but really here is more of co-founder dynamic. So it's not really with like how you would pitch your VCs or quickly how you build your culture of your company. It's more being able to be transparent and be
Oh,
able
with
to
their
talk to
co-founders,
your
for
co-found
sure. No,
to
yeah,
your
no
co-founders.
secrets, no secrets.
And
Whatever's on your
yeah,
mind,
and
you
so
should share.
yeah, and this section is just
Yeah, and in
co-founders.
fact, I think I would apply it in life, with your wife, with your girlfriend, etc. Like, radically honest.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Um, the other thing is favoring experience instead of culture. So this is also something that I've often seen companies do is taking people who are very knowledgeable, who know how the company um, how to do the job, but they don't share the same culture, and that's very difficult, particularly if it's your co-founder. Um, uh, I if for example you think that the company should be one way and he thinks that the company should be a completely different way, even though he has a skill set to operate, the two conflicting information is going to be very confusing for the company. It's going to be very difficult. I think if I recall well, you had the same for a company, I guess Milko or one of them, where you had like an advisor or somebody who could have been a good match. It was going to be a good match, but he was like already set into thinking this is a way and never will be a different way, and therefore we can fit. So talk a little bit about through it. I
Yeah,
felt
no,
that I
we
didn't
we
give a
we,
great
we interviewed
example.
a number of co-founders, and definitely one of them seemed amazing, but like a very clear vision of what the company should be, and because of his experience in the industry, and we're like, perhaps, who knows if that's the way the future holds. But I think I have a perhaps better example. We just launched a company. Um, where's this better? Called Seafair, which is a marketplace for the workers that work on the oil tankers, and we've hired a lot of people that have experience in building startups and labor marketplaces, etc. And we figured we needed people from the industry as well. The thing is, if you come from an industry where everything's done by like relationships and pen and paper and coming into a tech startup environment, and so I think it was person in sales, very qualified, great resume, great everything. But the problem is like the integration with the rest of the team, and that was a very senior person, didn't quite work because the everyone else is like basically 24/7 on WhatsApp and SMS and like using tools, etc. And the speed of deliverables and the speed of iteration is completely jarring to someone who's not in tech. And doesn't expect that the deals are going to get done over a meal over 2 hours with a bottle of wine, and so even though it was an amazing person with the right experience, it actually didn't fit in our culture, and so being super sensitive to cultural issues, and so we need to find people that have both in this case.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you notice is that I would say that people learn on the job, so they will get good at something. If they want to learn sales, they want to learn coding, people will grow into the skill set, but it's very hard to change their culture mindset. If they think that things is needs to be a certain way and not another one, and you're in a startup, you don't know what, like, you might have to pivot, things might have to change, etc. If they're not willing to have this open mindset, it'll be very hard. So I prefer a more junior person with a great culture fit than the reverse. Obviously, if I can have both, that's fantastic. But again, if you have to pick the culture over the experience. Um, and not having a clearly defined role. So you actually already touched upon this. Not having a clearly defined role. I touched on it as well on overlapping skill. In the case of Fabrice, I kind of actually, quite frankly, copied what he did. He's like, no, you get into really smart people in together, and it will magically work. Oh, that's not necessarily true. And so you need to have clearly defined roles because there is going to be a lot of work to be done. And typically, the work that needs to be done is very eclectic at the company, and everybody needs to cover their base. And it cannot always be everybody is a batting guy or everybody is a left field guy, because if not, you are going to have one side of your company that's going to be very weak, and the other one that is so overstaffed that it's just not going to work. And I know it sounds again silly from the outside, and so many times, particularly when you have like two MIT guys or one Stanford, Columbia, both like Deloitte and Deloitte and McKinsey, and they want to do exactly the same thing, the exact same role, and they like the exact same thing. Ah, man, that's super, super, super hard to make it work. And I think we've seen it time and time again that business people tend to prefer the business side and the product side, while they kind of have a detriment for the sales side, I would say. That's what we've seen a lot and the sales side is actually the core of a lot and lots of businesses that absolutely needs to work. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about this, Fabrice. Not of your experience that worked magically, but some of the other things you've seen.
The well, I mean, first of all, I think we have a bias, you and I, and frankly, probably FJ Labs, for businesses that are not sales driven. And so, because it's always been like a lot of often it's been consumer facing, and so we've been like acquiring customers through marketing, and so yeah, the problem is that we're not particularly good at sales. We don't necessarily know amazing salespeople. So when we built even sales driven businesses, we've hired people that were more like us. And but the problem is no one wanted to touch sales, and so that turns out to have a problem when you have everyone who wants to do product and strategy and fundraising and not touch the sales part. And we've seen that. I mean, in multiple of the portfolio companies, but in a way, it's hard for me to talk about it more explicitly because I haven't lived through it because I've avoided sales-driven businesses like the plague.
I think it makes sense. I think the last thing is that there is a common knowledge that like single founder startups are very hard to operate, and that you should probably have a co-founder. And there is a lot of truth for this, but that does not justify taking on a co-founder for the sake of having one. People tell you need a co-founder. No, you need to have a co-founder if you have a clear if you guys are able to work together for a long period of time, if you guys feel that you have the same view on culture, if you guys feel that you have enough understanding on how and respect enough the other person's skill to work together, to work together while not having completely overlapping skills, so you can take on different roles. And then you take a co-founder because he's going to be a maximize. He's going to be maximizing his side. You're going to be maximizing your side. Do not take a co-founder because people told you you need a co-founder. And I know I'm saying it sounds like a platitude, and yet something that I've seen time and time again. All right. Talking a little bit about now you're at like between seed and series A. And for me, this is really where the gauntlet happen, where company comes and dies. Because you can find an initial market product fit. You can find, you can build something as 20K on shop, like for a Shopify website. And now you need to kind of figure out how to scale this to a point where it really becomes a business. And this is where most company dies, and definitely where my companies died when they didn't work out. And a lot of mistakes come associated with this because suddenly it becomes much more complicated, which is you have to deal with not only a small team, but you actually now to actually hire and scale your company HR wise, which makes a bunch of challenges. So here is really more about between the seed and Series A. If you've done a big seed, or if you've done a small Series A or a regular Series A, you would be right there in this category. Understanding the market, but not understanding how the incumbents well enough. This happens a lot to consultant type people who are like, I understand this market perfectly, but have never actually talked to a plumber or never actually talked to a plumbing company and don't understand their core problems. And I've done this mistake. I've done this mistake at Home 61 where I understood very well how real estate worked. I understand added value. I understand how the market dynamics worked. I understand the different players, but we were really going to disrupt the brokerages. But I didn't understand that the number one problem that brokerages had was recruiting, hiring, and retaining good quality agents. And what killed us was recruiting, training, and retaining good quality agents. We faced exactly the same problem. Yes, we had a tech spin on it. Yes, we had an amazing lead generation that they didn't have, but the core of their problem that some of them were able to solve. For example, Keller Williams does a very good job at dealing with that problem. Um, they became our problem too, and because we didn't know enough about their problem and how they solved it, we didn't realize we only knew how to solve it after years, like after a year of learning and so much time spent. So it's not enough just to know about the market. You actually need to understand the nitty gritty. And I think this is a little bit why I see a big trend in VCs backing specialists and getting and giving backing to people that are already like 10 years in industry and decide to now disrupt that very same industry. Can you
That's
talk a little
true
bit
in
about this?
B2B, right? Like in B2B, especially where you're changing behavior of people that are very entrenched. And so you probably most likely the people that are going to succeed actually kind of counter argument what we said before about like the co-founders or people with experience, right? So if you look at Node, which is a petrochemicals marketplace, the founder and CEO, and they're doing really well. Came, I think he was at like Dow Chemical for like 20 years, and so he has all the contacts required to make the behavior change. Because if everyone's doing things on email and Rolodex relationships, making them change requires they need to trust you. And if you've been working with them for 20 years, they trust you. And so we're especially in the B2B space and the B2B marketplaces, more and more people are coming from the industry and they understand the problems and they also have the relationships to convince people in the industry to make the changes required. But definitely a big trend because B2B has been a big trend. A lot of the things, most of the internet revolution over the last 20 years has been the consumer side. And it's not all done. There's still plenty to be done, but a lot has been done. In B2B, we're still at the very, very beginning.
Yeah, I completely agree. But here, I think it doesn't really contradict our point because it's not only the experience, but also the culture of wanting to change the market. And of course, if you can have both, please do have both. Another issue, and quite frankly, again, a problem that I think we've created. I think I come, and I think Fabrice, you come from this. I was the end of this generation. You were probably the beginning because you're quite a bit older, as we all know. Um, they not creating a relationship with incubating competitors. So we always have a good relationship typically with other founders, even if they're competing with us. But companies that are much bigger that could acquire you, could help you. This is something where, at least in my generation, I'll just speak for myself, where we always felt like, oh, those guys are not techs, they don't understand scalability, we're going to disrupt them, etc. And a little dig on this. I remember Fabrice saying that nobody will go to a grocery market in 2005 because they'll just buy groceries online, which turned out to be true eventually, thanks to COVID and thanks to like in Fresh Direct and whatnot. But um, it came with a little bit of a arrogance, like those incumbents they don't know. Well, those incumbents are fucking billion-dollar companies, and I hope we're not going to get demonetized or whatever on because I swear on YouTube. But the but I don't
I
know if you
don't
want,
know
but
the
I guess you
rules,
don't.
but I think it's
I'll
probably okay. But let's probably avoid swearing.
I'll try to I'll try to stay away. But so you're kind of looking a little down on the incumbents, but they actually got it. They have a great business. Like you should actually know them. And this is particularly important because they're going to be the one who is going to become massively strategic when you have like when the market evolve and you need to create a new product and they might want to do it with you or they might be excited. But it also might be very important when it comes to oh my God, we're not gonna actually make it. This is not going to be big. We should sell. Well, the only people who care about what you've built are actually the incumbent or the competitors. And if they followed your track since the very beginning, they're very likely to engage and you have a discussion with you and they might actually help you out even because they just like you and they can see why it would be a good fit. But if the first time you're talking to them is please acquire me because I'm dying, it's not going to go very well. And so having this relationship needs to be very early and needs to be very part of your strategy. And perhaps I think we've sold a few companies like that. So by we I mean I was just on the cap table, but Fabrice and the team sold it. I did absolutely nothing but pray. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
I'm not sure if a specific example would come to mind, but a few things. So first of all, I think, and most people like to talk about themselves and like to talk about what their story and how successful they are. So you can actually talk to direct, and we're no, and this is probably an example of that. But the
you mean a podcast of two people talking their story?
but so you can actually go talk to your competitors, and they're more than happy to tell you what they do well and their story, and so you can learn a lot. And that's true of both your direct online competitors, but frankly, the offline competitors. So you can learn a lot by talking to them from that perspective, but and build a relationship with them because it will come in handy in both cases. If things go really well, they might buy you. If don't go really well, they may be the acqui hire to like save your company. I mean, especially that's one of the beauties of the US. You can get acqui hires when things are going okay but not great. Very often, we've had many companies acqui hired. Sometimes in the industry, sometimes not. Now, one thing VCs, especially the big name VCs, do really well is organize these like corporate days where when I was at OLX, we had General Catalyst as one of the co-leads with Bessemer, and they would invite all the potential corporates who could be interested in this to go and meet us. And so every year we spend a couple of days talking to like everyone in a related industry where what we were doing was interesting to them, and starting to build these relationships, which we frankly didn't have on our own. So VCs actually, especially the big name VCs who sold a lot of companies before, play a big role here. I mean, FJ Labs, we will help you fundraise your next round because we have relationships with VCs, but we don't have those relationships, so we can't really help you on the exit. And in fact, like at the exit, Bessemer, like the partner who's absolutely fantastic, Jeremy Levine, like kind of negotiated the entire deal for us. He was our banker in a way. So the VCs can play a big, but you need to be open to it. You can't be like, oh wow, they're offline, they're gonna die, And the problem is, as tech founders, we have a tendency to be a bit arrogant, and because we know better, we're gonna kill them. They're the old school way. It's not that relevant. Problem number one, and also we kind of live in the future. I mean, like your example. I mean, I remember another example. I think in 2002, my dad told me like, our dad, well, like, should I invest in Netflix? They're going public, and I'm like, clearly shipping DVDs by mail makes no sense. I mean, we're going to have broadband. Everyone's going to be watching on demand, and if you watch on demand, they may not pivot and become the winner in that category. The margins will be lower. Now, that was 2002, and I think the first year that streaming was bigger than DVDs might have been like 2012 or 13. Like, so the future happens slower than the people at the forefront of it expect. Problem number one, and in this case, they also pivoted and did a wonderful job. But so I was wrong.
Well, I think this entire presentation is how many times can we be wrong? But going a little bit on this is missing the shift from being friends to being a leader. And this is a mistake I felt I've done. Particularly in one of my companies, I was actually very close friends with the people that we started with the company, and their happiness really mattered. And it was really sensitive. And when the team grow, I didn't do that shift. I kept on trying to be the friend of my employees. And first of all, that's not what it's not what that's not what they're here for. They don't join your company because they want to be your friend. They join your company because they either believe in the company, because they like the job, or because they believe in you as a leader. And being a leader and being a friend is very different, and you have to make that shift. And it's kind of fundamentally different where, look, we have hard deadlines. We need to be able to talk honestly. We need to be very clear of what we need to do, and we need to also say if there was a mistake. And biting your tongue, going like, oh, they had a big situation, and like, of course, you want to be nice, you want to be understanding, have a good culture, but you're here to lead this into a success. If you don't lead this into a success, everybody lose their job. So that does not is not a friend. And so there's kind of a more operational tactic where, look, you raised your first money. Now it's really time to stop being a garage kind of mentality of like a bunch of friends in a garage. Now is somebody has to take the lead, and it needs to be you. And that shift needs to happen. And that's quite frankly why a lot of founders, after a certain time, they don't want to be the CEO anymore, is because suddenly it's a lot more about HR. It's a lot more about culture. It's a lot less like hang out with your buddies, and that's fine. It's just a different type of founder. But this is one of the biggest issue why founders eventually don't scale past a certain stage. Um, and I think that's kind of it. You have to eventually just say, like, hey, we're leading this. We're not just creating just a Teletubbies team. With this confusing tech team with magician, I'd love for you to take this, Fabrice, because I think we've been on many calls with founders, particularly founders who are super smart, super bright, knows their industry, but just have a hard time working with tech teams. And like super like genius people who are just are failing to just to see a little bit why it's hard to work with technology. So please take it away.
Yeah, I think the problem is a lot of people don't really. If you don't have a product or technology background, you don't know what's easy or what's hard, and so you're not really good at like defining the priorities, because a project that may take 4 weeks to you looks kind of the same project that may take 1 week, and so we've seen people have conversations with programmers, and they're completely unrealistic in terms of what can get done, but they don't realize how unrealistic they are. And they think, the way it works is you go and say, this is what I want the product to do. Okay, you guys go and do it. And there are really clear best practices of how you work with tech team, how you define the specs, how you write the user stories, how you allocate the amount of work. And I think most founders probably would benefit from doing basic product management training, because I mean, you and I have both been in a way product CEOs, so we're the being scrub masters, defining the tech priorities, writing the user stories. But many people who haven't been in tech before don't know that, and so the tech team is this black box. Like, please go and build me this. And first of all, and the tech team needs really clear specs, because it may be clear in your mind what it is you want built. They have no idea. That's why it's really important that you actually have very clear specs, very clear user stories and walkthroughs, and think through all the exceptions, etc. And yeah, the number of times where like amazing founders are like, the tech team is like failing and it's not working, and it's really the problem with them, is not the tech team and their misunderstanding of how you work with the tech team.
I think in a no-code environment that we're getting into, where really the no-code is getting really good. Um, you, there was a saying that said, particularly the Mark Zuckerberg kind of emphasis, where you need to be a CEO who codes. I think you need now to be a CEO that does product. So maybe it's just very self-fulfilling because this is what I like to do, but at the same time, if you have if your company relies on technology to be able to grow, to be able to do most of everything, you need to have a basic understanding of how it works. And I say product is a very low touch approach to get there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But going with this, giving senior people non-stimulating tasks for too long. I mean, thing that I've seen over and over, you hire like this amazing people for his Rolodex, for his experience, etc. But the reality is that your startup actually needs to do some really manual crap. And that's fine. Senior people will do this for a little while, but eventually, when it's not fun anymore and you're just scrubbing databases for X amount of time, uh, they're going to be unhappy. Don't have to touch too long. I think it's kind of obvious, but it's definitely a problem that I've seen, particularly when you're very excited about your idea. You can really like this kind of like excitement and charisma brings a lot of people to you, and a lot of people who are senior who would like to have a new stuff in their mind, in a new chapter in their life. They're excited to join a startup, and then they realize that it's not as glamorous, or they're not going to do what they really want to, because you do what the startup need, not what you would like to do. So just really quick, my beautiful problem for Shoes for You: building the team in expectation of growth. Okay, at Shoes for You, we had built this beautiful idea of this D2C e-commerce, and we raised $6 million off of a PowerPoint. I mean, it was a great time. It's a very exciting time that I hope I'll be able to talk about in a different panel, which was just like some moment in time where people are very excited about an industry or about a region, and at that time it was Brazil. So we raised $6 million. We didn't have a logo, but what we did have was a head of logistics. We didn't have an office, or a logistical center, but we had a head of logistics. We had a CTO, so that was warranted. We also had a head designer for the shoes, despite the fact that we didn't even know what kind of shoes we were going to do. We had myself. We had a head of finance. And so we built this massive of team of like super senior people, but we didn't find because we expected it to work and we expected to find market product fit almost immediately. But when we didn't, suddenly I had like this super heavy SG&A for a company that like was making like so little revenue. I think like at some point I was looking like we had like something like 150K in salaries or it was not salary because we're always light on salary, but 160K of SG&A and like $12,000 in revenue. I was like, okay, we have a problem. So, of course, if you're in a rocket ship and it turns out to be right, fantastic. But my advice is always be one person short rather than one person too many.
Yeah, hire when it
It
hurts, right? Like, you don't want to hire too early, just in case you don't find that product market fit, and maybe you need to pivot, right? Like, what if you have this extraordinary chief marketing officer who's amazing at SDM and Facebook acquisition, and turns out you should be building a sales team. You have the wrong person, or vice
I think it
versa.
happened at Zingy. I think at Zingy, your marketing person was great at B2C, but you switched to B2B.
Absolutely,
Fuck.
and
In
and
this
he was
case, I mean, you
amazing, but we
couldn't
had to
like
let him
it
go.
happened 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Um, so for the second part, this region again, big gauntlets is still in the same region of seed and Series A. Um, when you're a leader, not learning to trade some inefficiency to focus on what's more important. I'm going to touch on this just real briefly, which is basically you're probably the number one sales guy of your company. You sell your company to everyone. I remember I was pitching Home 61 to my Uber driver in the morning to tell him what an amazing company I was building and how good it was, and I was pitching all day long. So I was pretty good at it. And sometimes your sales team, don't have the same passion and their conversion rate, or even in marketing, like, or your account manager, they might not be as good as you to do a particular job, but it doesn't matter. They cannot go fundraise for you. If the biggest, most pressing thing you need to do is fundraising, go do that. Let them being a little bit less efficient. They'll get there. Eventually, they'll be a lot better than you at this. It's completely fine. Like trade some efficiency for doing what's more important. It's grading. It's hard. You feel like you have to jump on every problem, but just focus on what's
Yeah,
more is the
in
most important.
economics, there's David Ricardo who came up with this theory of comparative advantage, and so this is pure Ricardian comparative advantage. If you're a lawyer, but you type faster and you're a better assistant than your assistant, you should still be a lawyer because of the relative amount of money you make relative to them. And so here, just do the thing that is the most important. And I think that's the point you're about to make, which is that the people you hire are a little bit less good than you are at whatever that job is. That's totally okay.
Absolutely, and I would, and no, don't get me wrong. This is when you're at seed and Series A. You're building a team. You have people at pre-launch seed. You're doing everything. Yeah, of course you're doing everything. You have 100 hats, but transitioning out of it is part of the mistake, and one for quite frankly, one that I made. It was very hard for me to see things that could be better that were not being better and distracted me very often. Oh man, doing too many tests without a clear success or failure metric. Particularly when you have an amazing CTO, which I was being blessed several times as having just great people in tech, you can do so many things. You can test so many things, and the market are so wide, and you could do so many things. Like let's just say like you're doing a shoe company. Are you doing boots as well? Are you not doing boots? Are you doing boots as a retail? Are you doing boots like there's so many things that you could do. And you're surrounded by creative people, like your co-founder is typically creative, and so they want to do a lot of different tests. But then if you don't have clear success or failure metric, you never know if it didn't work because you didn't put enough resources, or it didn't work because it was never going to work. And so you end up spending a lot of time, a lot of hours um, just not having not having an answer, not having an answer, and that's very very difficult. I remember at some point, we decided that we were gonna launch bags for Shoes for You, and we were gonna launch earrings and on and so forth. And in this case, eventually we got it because it was because the revenue spoke for itself. But we didn't really have any way to. We didn't really have a metric to kind of like test. Like, should we do it? Should we not do it? Like, what is going to be? At what point do we pull the plug? Do we not pull the plug? In one of the cases, earrings didn't work at all. Bags, massive success. But it was just because it was obvious with the revenue. We didn't have the success metrics that we should have, and quite frankly, those are the one that I remember. But we did so many other tests with no success metrics that we just ended up wasting our time. It needs to be a really tight schedule.
Yeah, and in fact, often it's better to A/B test than multivariate test because N, which is the number of people you tested on, may be too low if you're an early stage startup. So and test only one thing at a time. You're testing multiple things simultaneously. You have no idea what is actually moving the needle.
So the next one is raising at too high a valuation, which is not a problem I face too often. But it did have, I mean, like it did happen with Shoes for You, where we raised like I think 6 on 12, and we like on a PowerPoint, like that was like our fun day, like our pre-seed, and that created a massive problem because the expectation of growth is that now you cannot just have to beat your numbers compared to other people who would go to seed at Series A. But now, as those numbers, like we were at those number of like an 18 post, we needed to beat a massive Series A or a small Series B right from the start. So like the expectation was massive, and if we were not going to meet that expectation, then for sure we were going to do a down ride, a down round. And by the way, spoiler, we did a down round because we couldn't possibly feel this without having a miracle. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, and like sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but what would
Yeah,
be
I
your
mean, look, if
suggestion?
you raise a lot of money at a high valuation ahead of traction and you put it to good use and you grow into the numbers and beyond, and you can, great, you just had less dilution than expected, you had more resources, and everything was fantastic. And if you can do that, that's wonderful. The problem is that happens in maybe 1% of the cases. And more often than not, what ends up happening is you barely grow into the valuation you just raised at. And so the next round you're struggling, it makes it a lot harder. Maybe you raise at the same price or marginally more, perhaps. And down rounds often kill companies, by the way. Like if you need to raise at a lower valuation, there's these things called anti-dilution provisions. And so the people from the previous round are like getting more equity than they would have had otherwise. And because it dilutes the founders so much where they end up with nothing in the company anymore, they don't want to do it. And so it often ends up that if you've raised too high a price, your price for perfection, if you don't get there, you die. And it also makes a problem, it creates an issue on exit. Because if a VC comes in at 100 million, and the company ends up being worth 30 or 40, the liquidation preference, and if you raise a lot of capital, is going to take over all the returns. So we've had companies that did well and they sold for whatever 80 million, but because the 80 million had been invested, the founders made nothing. And so had they been able to be more capital efficient, which possible. Part of the problem, there are many problems here I probably should highlight. One is if you raise more money, you have a tendency to spend it. And so you end up increasing your burn rate and not necessarily increasing the outcome of what you should have done. You do more tests and you hire more people, and things don't actually necessarily accelerate beyond where they would have been had you raised less money. Two is your price for perfection. You may not get there in the next round, but actually three, you may not get the exits either. Like if your valuation is too high, people don't buy you. We had this problem. I think the most visible experience in the FJ experience, I was chairman of that company, is BP. I mean, BP, because they grew from 0 to 100 million revenues very quickly, was able to raise at like over 100 million valuation. Then the next round, we were still growing quickly. I think we raised at like 689 million post-money valuation. I mean, the deliverables that people expected in light of like a nearly 700 million valuation was like great unit economics, hundreds of millions of revenues. And we grew a lot, but we just didn't grow into that valuation. And so all of a sudden people started discussing, oh, what if the next round is 400 instead? And the thing is that triggered so many anti-dilution and conversations and conflicts that it really killed the company. I mean, you increase the probability of dying dramatically if you raise money at too high a price. So if you know you're going to put the money to good use and you know it's going to be great, go for it. But you're really increasing the probability that you make zero as opposed to something. And to me, that's a related question. I don't know if you touch upon it. It's pick the right VC for you, not the VC that gives you the highest price. Because when you pick a VC, it's
Just
yeah.
as an interruption, the very next
Okay,
point.
well then
So please go ahead.
because
Jump
they're
right
really
into it.
related.
They're very related. Very nice. Go for it. Go for it. Jump right into it,
Yeah.
please.
So my first company Auckland. We had like term sheets like 10 million valuation, 12 million valuation, and then Bernard Arnault, which was like this richest guy in Europe, worth like whatever, I don't know how much he's worth these days, 100 billion. He made like 18 million pre-money. It was so much more money invested, so much higher valuation. I was like, oh, obviously that's the right bet for the right person to be with. The problem is if you take money from VCs and who are in the business, they know that things can go well or not so well, and they know that there's going to be another round and another round in 18 months, another round after that, and they have expectations. If you take money from people that are in there for other reasons, your interests may not be very well aligned. In this case, he liked to be the old school industrialist who was in the internet. And so when the opportunity came to sell the company for hundreds of millions, he didn't want to sell. I'd be like, oh, no, I don't want to be a mere financial player. I'm a strategic here, which is actually in a related. So there are multiple like sub nuances here. Nuance number one, let's say even between VCs, the relationship you have with the board member, the person who's going to be on your board, matters a lot. And so they're all professional investors. They're all on the same level. But there's some people you're going to get along with really well, and you know they're going to have your back when things go badly. And by the way, things will always go badly at some point in time. I mean, you might have to look through the 08, 09 financial crisis or the COVID year. There are periods where your company's not going to grow as quickly as possible. You want someone who's going to be on your side, and you're with them for the next 4 or 5 years. And so picking the right person for you is way more important than optimizing whether the pre-money valuation is 15 or 20. Now, if it's 50 versus 100, as long as you're not overly pricing yourself, which we talked about before, maybe you need to think about it. But if it's within the ballpark, having the right partner on your side who's going to be the most helpful for you makes way more money. Makes way more sense. Problem number one. So between people in the same category, take the best one for you. Now, different categories. So taking money from anyone, which is the title of this category, I would avoid strategics in general. And the problem with strategics is if they're a potential buyer for your company, it'll be great in the early days. You get maybe more higher revenues, you get capital, whatever. But in the long run, when you want to sell the company, you're going to realize you've made your company almost impossible to sell. Because other potential strategics are going to assume that if they bid, this strategic will just counterbid, and therefore they're wasting their time. And so you ultimately can only sell to the one already in the cap table, which means you're going to sell at a much lower price. And by the way, that's true even if they have no rights, right? Like they have 10% of the company, they have no right of first refusal, no nothing, and yet other people will assume that they will just buy you if they bid, so they won't bid. And so just their presence at the cap table is a problem. The other problem is if someone, by some miracle, someone else bids and they don't counterbid, people are going to say, wait a minute, they have more information than me. Why are they not bidding? What do they know that I don't know? Perhaps I should rethink that. And so having strategic in the cap table is very dangerous for the exit. Things will be great for 5 years, 7 years, whatever. But the day you want to exit, you'll find that it'll be a lot harder. And you'll probably sell at a much lower price to the very person on your cap table. Now, the one caveat to that is if by having them, it gives credibility and other people then can come on board, both as partners, clients, or investors, or you have multiple of them, then it could work. But there's very specific cases where I think this is true. For the most part, I would avoid strategics just to raise money from venture capitalists. Same thing with family offices, right? Like, I don't know if Arnaud's strategic or a family office, but they may change strategy, they may change idea or vision, and they may not be there for your next round. They don't understand what you're doing. And so it's much harder to have constructive conversations. So yeah, take money from VCs.
Just to highlight this, when did you ultimately sell to Arnaud? How old were you?
I was 26.
How much money do you think you would have made if you didn't take his money versus how much money did you actually make?
Yeah, so eBay came to buy us at like a 300 million valuation. I had 40% of the company, and I wanted to sell to them, and I would have made $120 million. He preferred to not sell at all, and if sell to another company that he was an investor in. So I thought need a pretty big conflict of interest. But I did. It comes back to the early thing on like having the right partners. I didn't read the legal contracts. I didn't really understand them. I didn't know what a drag was. I didn't have a drag. I didn't know a lot of those things. And
Yeah, but just to exemplify,
yeah, so
so
I could have made
26,
120
100.
million. Instead, I sold for like 2.5 million, of which I gave 1.8 to my employees because we sold it for less than expected, than they really deserve. So even though on paper most of that should have gone to me, I'm like, it's not fair to them. They've worked day and night for 3 years. I gave them, so I made 700K. Long
So
story
look,
short, instead of
nobody's gonna
120 million, I made 700K.
So nobody's gonna cry for you because like you made 2 million at 26, and that's really awesome and very special. But you could have made 120 million. I mean, this is just epic. So yeah, don't take anyone's money. It really does have an impact. Sometimes it has $120 million impact. I'm sure that you must have missed Jose and Ariel so much at that
For
point, even though you
sure.
didn't know them. All right, moving on, and on top of that, this one is going to be a lot faster. Is misunderstanding the 18 months of capital, a problem I see time and time again. Again, remember, the race is on. You take the capital. You have 18 months to your next fundraising, but please understand that your reality is that it's 1 year. You have 1 year to prove your metric, and maybe an extra 3 months to figure it out if things didn't work out. But after 1 year, this is when you have to start fundraising, because your fundraising will take between 3 months and 6 months. So if you start fundraising on month 17, it's not going to work out. You're going to run out of money. Could be a good company. You're not going to have the time to show what you have. So do not misunderstand the 18 months. The 18 months is actually 12 months of solid metrics and 3 to 6 months of fundraising. Timing is everything. It's a race, and don't miss it. And this one is very, very important. I'm going to touch upon it again a little bit afterwards. But the biggest value in all of those companies is your time. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to grow a lot, but sometime your company is just not going to grow. And I've done this mistake. Really, Home 61, I'm an optimistic guy. I really saw that every single time I was gonna find a solution, I was gonna get it. I was gonna find the one thing that was gonna make it work. We change the team, we change the model, we pivot, we do flat fee, we do salary for agents, we do a somersault on one leg and kill a chicken and do macumba around it. Like I really thought we were gonna find it, but quite frankly, if I had been an investor and I had looked at the company year 4, year 5, and I stretch our money, like taking on the 18 months capital, I'd stretch that money on 27 months. Like we went lean, but I was wasting my time, my VC's time, my investor, my employees' time. Like we should have stopped probably quite a little bit earlier. And I didn't have good success and failure metrics for this. I just had hope and grit, and which is great. Like you should have hope and grit, but at some point you should also have clear metric when to stop and flogging a dead horse. And I have to say, every time I had to close a company, it was tough, but the VCs understood. It's part of their game. They know that some company is going to fail. They're not going to blame you. If anything, if you do it in the right way, they actually respect you more. Your employees are going to be disappointed, but they're going to find another job. And if anything, particularly I choose for you, all of my employees, I was able to help them get a new job almost immediately, better paying one at that, and all went on to have amazing careers. So it's not the end of the world to
Well,
fail.
I think totally agree. It's not the end of the world to fail. In fact, I think we failed countless times, both of us,
Yeah.
and every entrepreneur who's been successful has failed. I don't know anyone who succeeded without failing. But the thing is, and that point that you just made is finding the right nuance between being gritty enough that you've tried hard enough, but not like overdoing it because of like if nothing works, like you need to give up. And it's actually better to fail fast than to fail slow. So, but fast still probably means 18 months, right? Like you try everything. Okay, it didn't work, it didn't work. Because usually, look, if you're 50% away from where you need to be in metrics to get there, you're gonna get there. If you're 10x away, you're not. There's nothing you can do that's going to get you there. And so if you don't have product market fit, you don't have product market fit. That's it.
Yeah, and I think this, and by the way, I just to that point, I was not crazy for Home 61. We always had good unit economics, and we had some months that were good. There are some metrics that were very good, and it always felt like we could get there. And I think like if you look at, I think for Fabrice's side, all my data was like kind of like the precursor of Dropbox. Um, it could have worked, but we kept on trying, and like really stuck to it. And I didn't do 18 months, as Fabrice said. I did 27, 27 months just stretching that money, and it was hard. Like it was exhausting, but it didn't feel exhausting until I
No.
stopped. Actually, once I finally stopped, all of it kind of like fell onto me, and like I think like for a month I just had to just reset. But
Yeah, all my data,
and it
by the
was so
way, it's also an era of like self-funding, right? Like I funded the company
yeah.
myself, and so I funded it for 4 years or something like that, and the product ended up being essentially exactly Dropbox, except 5 years too early before broadband. I lost. It's probably my biggest loss, personal loss ever. I lost like 4.7 million of my own money that I put in that, but I didn't put it all at once. I put 100K and 100K and 100K, and had there been professional external investors, probably said, okay, we've tried everything, doesn't work. Like bandwidth on the upside is not high enough, and I continued for too long. Lofty, frankly, I think we continued for too long. We kept it alive. We kept putting more money and more money. And we thought we were going to get there, and we just never got there. And I think Mark and us, frankly, probably should have pulled the plug earlier.
Yeah, I mean, flogging a dead horse. You love your baby, and you're not like if you're an entrepreneur, you're not a quitter. Like you are a fighter, and I don't know if I can punch hard, but I can take a punch a lot. And I got punched for 5 years, pummeled, and I kept on going. And even when we finally pulled the plug, it felt so bad admitting defeat. Admitting defeat was the hardest thing, but it was the right call. Like if I had been an angel investor, I would have never invested in the company, and I think that's really say something. All right. Now for the later stage. And you found your market product fit, and now you're scaling, and now you're growing. And here I'm going to talk a little bit more about Brent's Club, where everything seems fine, but actually everything's on fire, and like you don't necessarily realize that there is a problem. And so this is a later stage company, so I have a little bit less experience. Here we go. And apparently I do not have my slide working. So the good news is I'm just going to tell you some of the biggest problem when you grow, and I think one of the biggest problem when you grow is um, the culture. If you decide to have the culture being dictated by the company, but without guiding it and without defining the culture basically build itself. And the odds are that you hit bullseye is zero, because if you don't go exactly in the direction that you have defined, hoping to get there by luck doesn't work. And so, to talk a little bit about it, it's a lot about HR and getting the right people. So at Brent's Club, we were growing super fast. I think we were making $1 million in revenue after 6 months. We grow one of the biggest e-commerce, and I'm very proud to say, even to this day, that like after 2 years, we were 300 people in the company. But we were growing so fast. Our HR policy was if we see somebody walking in the street in front of our office, grab him and put him to work. That was our only criteria. Like if you could leave, if you could breathe, we would take you in. And quite frankly, if you didn't breathe well, we would still take you in. We had no more criteria, and so it was not a big problem because like the business was really strong, but it became a problem when little by little everything started breaking. Like our logistic was not delivering as fast, our customer service was not really working as fast, our sales team was not being as good, and suddenly everything was breaking apart. And this has to do with also a new transition in role. As you become more of a leader and you become less operational, you need to actually very clearly define the culture of the company that you want to have and you think is correct. But it also means that you cannot delegate HR 100%. So, yes, of course, you will have an HR team. Yes, you will have a head of HR, but you are the keeper of the culture of your company. I would argue that even all the way to 100 employees, and if you can more, always keep the veto on on the hiring, meaning that they must meet with you for half an hour, more an hour if you have the time, and they need to be a good fit. And if you don't think it's a good fit, if you see a red flag, don't get the red flag. always go with one person less rather than one person too many. And I would say just your role as a leader becomes much more all about HR as you grow and become bigger and bigger. Of course, there is a strategic. Of course, there is a fundraising on it, so forth. But setting the tone for your
Yeah,
growth.
I
I think
think
Fabrice.
that's why it worked. That's a role Alec did really well at OLX. So not only did we have an amazing head of HR, but he definitely made sure that he talked to every single person before they were hired, even when we were at like 1,000 employees. And so that actually made a very big difference in terms of making sure we had the right people, et cetera. And I have to admit, he had. I wouldn't have never done that. I didn't have that. I wouldn't have had the patience for this.
Absolutely, and I think that's exactly correct. I think that Alec for OLX was unbelievable in that front, and that's why it worked so well. Because how many people were you, or were you when you left the company?
Not sure. Probably over 1,000 for sure.
All right.
A
So
lot.
if the CEO of the company, is not sure how many people you have, you might have a problem. But thank God Alec was there to do it. Kind of like the reverse problem was building complicated processes for no reason. This happens a lot when you delegate HR and you get some very senior people who just kind of like replicate what they've seen in different companies. And so you have all of those processes that are overlapping. Building no processes. You need to scale. You need to be able to get there. Very recently, I was talking to a company who is like crushing it, and quite frankly, to book appointments and still to do everything was like the CEO was doing a lot of it. And when I finally talked to that CEO, like it was like she gave me an appointment like at 10 o'clock at night because she was working all day, all night, and she was clearly dying. Like physically, it was super draining because they had missed a little bit on the process on the process side. Um, Not letting people fail, I think that's a very big one. When you're very senior or when you're a co-founder, you kind of know that things are going to break and things are going to and things are not going to work out, and so you just iterate, move very fast, etc. But as you hire a much bigger company, people need to feel empowered to fail. Because if they don't feel empowered to fail, they don't actually innovate. They don't actually try to do new things. They try not to get fired. And if their only job is trying not to get fired, your company is not going to move forward. So building a very safe environment where people fuck up, man, the people do not do well, and it's okay, and they're rewarded when they do well, and they're let know when like something doesn't work out or if they do.
Yeah, you
It's
need to
completely okay. It's
celebrate.
completely.
We did this test, it didn't work out, and the lesson from. So actually trying should be celebrated, even if it doesn't work out. Actually, the book that I loved the most this year, Loon Shots with Safi Bakal, is about that. Like how, as organizations grow, people stop rewarding taking risks and they start rewarding like titles and not failing. And so you need to try to counteract that. And there's a number of ways to do that that he highlights in the book. But I totally agree. Actually, quick time check. How much more do we have to go through? Because if
One more slide, which is exactly why I wanted to save some time for
okay,
you. So
so
I couldn't
so
agree more.
comment for the audience. If you have questions, try to start queuing them up and putting them in the chat, and I'll ask Olivier, or you can ask me, whatever you want.
Absolutely. So going, and I completely agree on the time check. And I have an amazing last slide that I need to show, so I want to make sure to go there. Not adapting to market change. I'm not going to go over this. This has not been a big problem for us. But like think of the Nokia of the world and think about the Kodak of the world. Like you need to change with their market. Platitude. I will let you get. Let's just go. We covered a lot of ground here, so I want to talk a little bit about the most common mistakes and the biggest mistakes. Most common mistakes: not having a quarterly plan, not deciding if it's like going to fail or not fail. Like what are you supposed to do with this thing? While I'm doing mentoring at Capital Factory, whenever I'm talking to early startup, like they don't really know where they're going, so it's hard for them to reach their destination. Misunderstanding VCs, like thinking that VCs have a ton of money, and like they will judge you and on your merit without really seeing the competition and flogging a dead horse. A lot of companies, like you keep on spending time. It's time to pack up your bags and do something more productive. I am the first one to have done this. I've done it many times. I get it, but very common. Biggest mistakes: founder market fit. You're excited. This could be a great idea, but you're not the right person for it. It's very grating because you don't have that many great ideas. So when you find a great idea and it's not you, it's annoying. But you know what? You have to find a different way to help it. Maybe give it to a friend, ask him to develop it, give him some money, find a way. Underestimating the compounded effect of talent. So if there is a common theme through a lot of the different stages, it's always about HR. It's finding the right co-founder. It's finding the right senior people. It's finding the like not letting the culture being defined without you. It really, when you're in a team of amazing people, everything is simple and everything is joyful. When you're in a team where things don't move, it's such a drag. So
Yeah,
talent is
actually,
key.
it's something we didn't discuss actually about location. We talked about like how hard it is to raise money if you're like in Miami as opposed to say New York or San Francisco. But actually, the other issue with location is actually talent, right? Like one of the main
Yeah,
reasons that it's hard to be in these secondary cities, and talent I think expresses itself in multiple ways. So first of all, you're not surrounded by peers, so you don't have other founders in other companies to like exchange ideas with. And then it's at every level when you're trying to recruit for your company, you don't find amazing people. And so I think the location plays a huge role here, beyond also, of course, being the right people, et cetera, et cetera.
absolutely. And it's a compounded effect. It's really and when I'm saying talent, I'm not saying like super like I'm not thinking like you just have to find the all of the Mark Zuckerberg of the world. It's talent at every level, at the entry level, the management level, the senior level, whatever. It's just talent everywhere. People who wants to grow, people who wants to learn. It's such a different thing. And actually a little plug for Clearbank. That's why I joined Clearbank is because I'm part of a team that is freaking awesome. And like they're all like in this new product, we were like 7 people, and they're all 7 are or 6 of them are heavy hitter plus me, and they're just that great. That's why I was super excited to join that
Yeah,
team.
further plug for
Clearbank in general
Clearbank.
is
I
just
think
amazing.
that company is absolutely amazing. I think they're going to be a $10 billion company, perhaps $100 billion company. They're like reinventing financing for small businesses. And the founders are amazing. The idea is amazing. The execution is amazing. I mean, it's amazing. And I'll give it 2 seconds. What they do is if you're a small business owner and like Shopify, basically they log into your Shopify, they look at your sales and profitability, they log into your Google marketing, SEM, and they look Facebook, etc., and they will lend you money to spend to scale your, and that's debt. Well, it's not really debt; it's a 6% fee, and you can imagine that Citibank will never do that, right? Like, so it's like modern day small business lending equivalent, and it's extraordinary.
Yeah. The team in general is amazing. My team is really what I was looking for, so I'm couldn't be excited. But to go back on track, one of the most common mistake and one of the biggest mistake is also flogging a dead horse. They're very common. You love your passion. This is what you want to do, and and like it's like your baby, and sometimes you have to kill the baby, and that sucks. But your time is. I wonder how the YouTube algorithm is going to read that, but um, and it sucks and it's really painful, but the most valuable thing is your time. You need to create value with your time for yourself, for your investor, for your employees, for your future employees, for your future investors. Go build something that works. Don't spend your life doing something that doesn't. I'm saying this to everybody who is in the audience. I'm saying this to myself again, like to myself. Like it's super hard. All right,
Yeah, fail
to
quickly,
get to help
basically.
you.
Look, I
Fail.
agree.
So getting there to get help because I just want to be ending a little bit on a positive rather than just all the freaking mistake I've done all my life. So I wanted to end on a little bit of a positive. Get 3 different people to help you. A coach. I took a CEO coach. It was an amazing experience. He's like your business therapist. He helps you on the day to day. He helps you maximize your assets. He helps you deal with the advisor, the investor, the employees, board member, all of the question you have. It's kind of like a safe space. Don't have the coach invest in your company. You might give him like maybe stock options or something, but like don't align him with the interest of your company. Align him with your interest, like with you. Pay him out of your pocket or maybe of the company if you can, if you can. But he's for you to be a better person. If you're a professional, you have a tennis. If you're Roger Federer, you have a tennis coach. If you are the number one basketball player, you have a coach. You should have a coach too. It's so important. People overlook this. It completely changed the dynamics. It makes you sharp on your game. Take an advisor, typically a market specialist. He's not going to be your coach. He will open door. He'll make introduction. He'll recognize some of the common issues in the category, and he's kind of like your market specialist. And finally, take a board member. He'll help you keep you on the big picture, make sure that you have your quarterly plan. He'll help you raise. He'll help you at the exit. I think Fabrice inadvertently did amazing segue to this earlier, which is like Bessemer basically became the banker of the company to sell it, and it was amazing. And that's exactly what your VC are. He might have been on the board, or
He
might
was
have
he
been
was
be
on
on
the
the
board.
board, but
Yeah,
basically,
he was on the board.
yeah.
And by the way, these are very different people. Like your VC is not your coach. You don't call them every day. It's really someone whose job is to be your personal coach. And there are people that kind of play that role. Like Tim Jackson is absolutely fantastic at that role. I don't know if he actually does it for other people than you, but he's amazing. And I think he was your coach. He was coach for many of our CEOs.
He was my coach. Yeah, he was amazing, and he is amazing.
Yeah. Then the advisor role, to your point, it's someone that I probably would not have hired in the company, maybe perhaps because of cultural fit. Like, so you're in this new business or you're in this business, and they have the Rolodex to open the doors to get you deals. But because they're old school, whatever, their cultural fit may not be there, that they should be an employee there. But you give them stock options, and it depends on what stage, et cetera. But like 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3%, could also be an investing schedule. But you usually have specialists in whatever industry you are to help you. Or if you need debt, someone who's going to help you on the debt side. And I would say all of our portfolio companies and all the FJ Labs companies that we build have 4 or 5 advisors who have like 0.2% equity probably on average, opening doors, making introductions, and being helpful or sharing knowledge of the category. And then the board members, of course, are typically the VCs.
Yeah. And that's basically it. So I wanted to finish this segment with this nice little picture of Fabrice and I. And the reason I picked this picture is because A, it's an awesome picture, but also B, it was before we made a lot of those mistakes. And I wanted to see like this big smile on our face before we knew how poorly we would do.
We also had a little bit more hair.
Yeah, that's true too. But I wanted to keep this as like how the pre-fail to success kind of brothers.
Well, thank you for joining. This was fun. I think hopefully everyone can realize that you fail your way to success, and failure does not impede success. In fact, it's hardly a requirement for success. And maybe with a little luck, you learn from our mistakes, so you don't make your own, and you can keep your hair.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and I'll see you guys next week.
Any time for questions? Or we were
I'm kind of late for my next call, and we actually have mostly people saying nice things, and that this was a great session, and thanking us for all the lessons learned. But no questions have come right now. But if they come, or people can always post it on the YouTube video when I post it, and we can answer by text then.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Olivier, for joining. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.